The moon of Muharram, times of sadness have come. The crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. The moon of Muharram, times of sadness have come. The crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. Betrayal by the Kufans set this moon on its course, calling out for their guide. Treachery with no remorse, Muslim and his sons. What a tragedy, oh what calamity. The moon bleeds to foresee, the moon bleeds to foresee. The moon of Muharram, times of sadness have come. The crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. On the 9th it heard the prayers of those pure souls, fought the rising sun for. Perhaps this could be its role. Akbar's azan so clear, this moon filled with fear. How will it possibly arise and see the state of those dear, and see the state of those dear? The moon of Muharram, times of sadness have come. The crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. It saw the 6-month infant, no water but an arrow. That night it shone its light on Rabab, filled with such sorrow. To see my asghar I crave, I hear nothing but his cries. Oh son, please do not arise, and with this mother sympathize, and with this mother sympathize. The moon of Muharram, times of sadness have come. The crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. Witnessed it the trampling on Sham-e-Ghariba, saw that night the terror, bodies scattered afar, tents looted and on fire, earrings snatched from Ruqayyah. This moon also in such pains, this household bound in chains, this household bound in chains. The moon of Muharram, times of sadness have come. The crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. From this month my Bibi had to wander veilless, Zahra's great grave is restless for her daughter princess, the cloak of purity. For this mother so holy, the beloved of Fatima, paraded in the bazaar, paraded in the bazaar. The moon of Muharram, times of sadness have come. The crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sisters and brothers, welcome to our program at the Iman Center here on the third night of Muharram. Today is the second of Muharram. We'll open here with the recitation of the Qur'an, and I'm going to request Brother Kareem to lead us on the recitation. Brother Kareem, please.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وقال الله لا تتخذوا إلهين اثنين إنما هو إله واحد فإياي فارهبون. وله ما في السماوات والأرض وله الدين واصبا أفغير الله تتقون. وما بكم من نعمة فمن الله ثم إذا مسكم الضر فإليه تجأرون. ثم إذا كشف الضر عنكم إذا فريق منكم بربهم يشركون ليكفروا بما آتيناهم فتمتعوا فسوف تعلمون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. السلام.
In the name of God, the Lord of mercy, the giver of mercy. God said, do not take two gods, for he is the one God. I alone am the one that you should hold in awe. Everything in the heavens and earth belongs to him. Everlasting obedience is his right. Will you heed anyone other than God? Whatever good things you possess come from God, and when hardship afflicts you, it is to him alone you cry out for help. Yet, when he has relieved you of your hardship, lo and behold, some of you act as your partners to your Lord. Let them show ingratitude for the favors we have shown them. Enjoy your brief time, soon you will know.
Brother Jahid here. It's like he is not here, so we will continue. Backup plan. Marthiya.
بر محمد آل محمد صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد. گھر سے جب بہر سفر سید عالم نکلے سر جھکائے ہوئے بادیدائے پرنم نکلے خیش و فرزند و کمر باندھ کے باہم نکلے رو کے فرمایا کہ اس شہر سے اب ہم نکلے رات سے گریائے زہرا کی صدا آتی ہے دیکھیں قسمت ہمیں کس دشت میں لے جاتی ہے. رخ کیا شہنے سوئے قبر شہنشاہ نام بہر تسلیم جھکے متصل باب سلام اذن پڑھ کر جو گئے قبر کے نزدیک امام عرض کی آیا ہے آج آخری رخصت کو غلام یہ مقام ہم سے اب شاہ زمن چھٹتا ہے آج حضرت کے نوا سے وطن چھٹتا ہے چین سے سب ہیں گھروں میں مجھے ملتا نہیں چین سخت آفت میں پھنسا آپ کا یہ نور ٹکڑے دل ہوتا ہے جب رو کے حرم کرتے ہیں بین ننھے بچوں کو بھلا لے کے کدھر جائے حسین شہر میں چین نہ جنگل میں ہمیں ملتی ہے دیکھیے قبر مسافر کو کہاں ملتی ہے. یہ وہ دن ہے کہ پرندے بھی نہیں چھوڑتے گھر مجھ کو درپیش ہے ان روزوں میں آفت کا سفر 7 بچوں کا ہے اے بادشاہ جنوں بشر ہے کہیں قتل کا ساما کہیں لٹ جانے کا ڈر تنگ جینے سے ہوں پاس اپنے بلا لو دانا اپنی تربت میں نوا سے کو چھپا لو بر محمد آل محمد صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل
صلى الله على النبي. Sisters, brothers, for us to organize the Muharram programs, we need participation from everybody here. So one of the feedbacks we got is that why do we play some recorded clips? Because we need to have reciters. Okay? So if we don't have live reciters, we have to go by recorded things. So if anybody here wants to recite in any language, Arabic, English, Persian, Urdu, please let us know. They will schedule it. So, Brother Majid, you want to recite Marthiya? Go ahead, please.
محمد وآل محمد صلوات ہم سے غم شبیر بلایا نہیں جاتا ہم سے غم شبیر بلایا نہیں جاتا یہ داغ کلیجے کا یہ داغ کلیجے کا مٹایا نہیں جاتا ہم سے غم شبیر بلایا نہیں جاتا کہتے ہیں علمدار کہ دے موت خدایا کہتے ہیں علمدار کہ دے موت خدایا منہ پیاسی سکینہ کو دکھایا نہیں جاتا ہم سے غم شبیر بلایا نہیں جاتا شیبول کمر ٹوٹی سنبھالو علی اکبر شیبول کمر ٹوٹی سنبھالو علی اکبر عباس صدا دیتے ہیں جایا نہیں جاتا ہم سے غم شبیر بلایا نہیں جاتا اکبر تو چھپاتے ہیں کہ شبیر نہ دیکھیں اکبر تو چھپاتے ہیں کہ شبیر نہ دیکھیں हाथों से मगर जख्म छुपाया नहीं जाता हमसे गमे शबीर भुलाया नहीं जाता ए शामियों सज्जाद के नाज़्म दुखाओ ए शामियों सज्जाद के नाज़्म दुखाओ बेरी को हिला कर तो जगाया नहीं जाता हमसे गमे शबीर भुलाया नहीं जाता हमसे गमे शबीर भुलाया नहीं जाता
Thank you, Brother Mahdi. I request our speaker, Sayyid Kirmani, to address us for tonight. Please welcome Salaat. Is he here? Speakers are here? Okay. Yeah, I think we got a message at 7:30, it should be in 10 minutes, so maybe something is late here. We got some also technical issues in the back. I apologize for the foil of the Qur'an was ready from yesterday. Something, didn't load okay. Looks like we are dealing with OneDrive issue, synchronization issue. So use all these things, sometimes things go wrong, unfortunately. So I apologize for that. Anyway, we have to fill the time. If anybody here wants to share any poetry in Persian, in Arabic, is here, okay? Yeah, okay, all right. So if anybody, brothers and sisters, if you want to share any poetry in Persian, Arabic, Gujarati, Urdu, Kiswahili, English, please let us know. We are welcome. While we wait for our speaker, just a request to you that we do need your help and support to help cover the expenses for the program. So we do have speaker expenses for travel and honorarium as well as lodging. We also have expenses that are related to the running of the center to provide for various things that we need to organize programs. So, we appreciate your generous contributions. Normally, we expect this to be, I think, really about $10,000, $15,000 is really what the expected amount is to cover these expenses. This is in addition to the tabarruk. So we really appreciate all those people who are signing up for the tabarruk. Thank you all for your support. Brother Shabir, you are on, please address us tonight. Welcome to Salaat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قول أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد مصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي ما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا من آياتنا عجبا صدق الله العلي العظيم زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد My respected elders, brothers and sisters, and youngsters in Islam and Iman, here in Seattle, across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: what is freedom? We've been discussing this concept of the eternal renaissance of the Husseini movement, that is the eternal rebirth of the Husseini movement, and how the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam gives us a new life in every era and every time. And in that, we are discussing this conversation of the future of Islam. That is, what does the face of Islam look like in the 21st century? 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line, 20 years down the line. And I've opened the loops of a few questions in the previous nights, and we're going to seek to try to give you the tools to answer yourself those questions in the next few nights. And one of those questions that we opened and discussed last night was this discussion of migration. And I want you to embark on, and myself to embark on, what is the relationship between justice, migration, and freedom? Freedom being tonight's theme in particular. And how are these three concepts connected? In particular, justice and freedom, but the intermediary between them being migration, which we discussed last night. And how does that relate to you and I? That's one question. The second question is this notion of what we discussed in the past night and the night yesterday and the night before that. What is ta'arrub ba'd al-hijra? And we defined it last night as well. And the main key question that I want you to be able to answer yourself in the first few nights is, why is it that the Imam said that ta'arrub ba'd al-hijra and shirk is the same thing? What is it that you and I need to understand in what the Imam is saying here? How is it that that migration where I stop practicing my deen is equal to shirk? What is it about it that associates something with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If you can understand that, my job in this part is we've accomplished that goal. But really think about what's the answer to that question. And the third element of the equation is, what is freedom? And what is the prerequisite to freedom? How do you get to freedom? That is, as Americans, we foster and we say that freedom is a beautiful thing. And indeed it is a beautiful thing. But what is it that is necessary before we get to freedom? And why is it a value of humanity that every single person says is sacred? Freedom is something that is important. Freedom is something that is valuable. Therefore, these are the preliminary discussions of what we're trying to see about what is the value. Will there be people in the mosques, in the masajids, in the Husainiyas in 5, 10, 15 years from now, 20 years from now? Why is it that wherever I go, coast to coast, across the pond, everyone is trying to pull and get people to be active throughout the year? It's not just in Kirkland, by the way, it's everywhere. Every leader in the community, everyone who is part of the community saying, why don't you come in this month or that month? Why is it that this, alhamdulillah, by the way, we should not have a judgmental approach. We should be appreciative of the people. We don't know how far someone's coming from, number one. Number two, we don't know how much they're practicing when we're not there. Are we the judge that we know what's going on in people's lives? But what I'm saying is, the question that many leaders are asking is, why aren't people coming? And why aren't they coming consistently? And that's a question that we need to ask, because you may find that the perceived value of the mosque is not that much in their mind anymore. And the question that we need to ask is, why is that? That's why I asked last night, what is the incentive for people to come today? Before, there were otherworldly incentives. That is, I will go to heaven, I will stay away from hell. There's an incentive that, for example, I will have a better hereafter. But you find that these incentives don't hold sway over people anymore. So when it comes to things, it takes a back burner. So this is something that's really important for us to be very honest about. If we want our next generation to be in these mosques, in these Husainiyas, in these Imam Bargas, we have to be very intellectually honest with them. And intellectual honesty requires before it intellectual humility. Intellectual humility is the prerequisite to that. That is, I need to be able to say, as I hope I'm able to say, I don't have all the answers. I could be wrong. That rather than telling my child, this is exactly how you have to do it, maybe I should first stop and ask them, what is their worldview? How do they see the world? Maybe I should stop and ask them, what is your worldview? Because if I come from, I personally was born and raised here, but if somebody
was living across the way and they grew up in Iran or Iraq or in Pakistan or India, and they came here in their 20s or 30s, they already came with a certain amount of cultural and religious baggage, as it's called. They came with a worldview. And over time, maybe that worldview shifted, and maybe over time that worldview stayed the same. But you cannot judge apples and oranges. You cannot judge these two worldviews the same. And the worldview matters. And we need to be very aware of that. I'll give you an example very quickly as we're getting on the onset of this conversation. What we discuss in our Husayniyas, in our Imam Bargas, in our centers is impacted by zaman and makan, by time and space. If you want to come to a mosque or Husayniyah, the flyer for the majlis has to have two things at a minimum. It has to have the zaman and the makan. It has to have the time and the space. It has to tell you what time is this program going to happen? Desi time or Cuban time, as we call it in Florida, or on time prompt, and the address. You need to know where you need to get to. Otherwise, you won't get there. These two things are vital components of what needs to happen. So similarly, Islam, you may find, is impacted based on the way it is taught is impacted based on the zaman and makan. For example, if you go to a place like Iraq, or a place like Iran, or a place like, for example, Pakistan, or a place like India, what are the issues of the day amongst the Muslim community? Let's take this example. If you go to the world, you'll find, for example, Indonesia being the most populous Muslim country. After that, you will find other non-Muslim, not really Muslim countries necessarily. They're supposed to be secular democracies that have a high Muslim population. For example, India has a huge Muslim population. And then after that, you'll find, for example, let's take some of these examples. If you go to a place like Pakistan, now Pakistan is an interesting dynamic. Amongst Muslim countries, predominantly Muslim countries, it has the highest population in some sense of the second highest population of the Sunni community after Indonesia, and the second highest population of the Shia community after Iran. Azerbaijan actually has a very high percentage as well, but in terms of volume, gross volume, they're not there. Anyways, so it's an interesting case study of Pakistan because it has the second highest population of a Muslim country. India has a very high population as well, but of a Muslim country of Sunnis and second highest population of Shia. So if you go to a place like Pakistan, is anyone necessarily debating on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Not necessarily, although atheism is on the rise there tremendously. Is anyone debating on, for example, Rasulullah? No, everyone's saying Rasulullah, we accept Rasulullah. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. So what is the debate of the day? What is the discussion of the day? People start debating and discussing on after Rasulullah, who is the Khalifa Bila Fasl, for example. Is it the first or the second or third or the fourth? These types of issues reign in that situation. Now, let's take another example. Let's take Iran, for example. Now, in the practicing community, and I mentioned last night also, a lot of people who are not Persian or not Iranian don't realize there's a very diverse view of Islam within Iran. And it's a very old civilization. It's not just this or that. It's not practicing or non-practicing Shah or non-Shah. These types of things you need to be very careful of brushing with a broad stroke. But let's say amongst the practicing community within Iran, since the Safavid dynasty in the last 400 to 500 years, Iran has predominantly been Shia, although definitely there are minorities. You will find, for example, you will find many minorities that are Christians, Sunnis, Jews, and others who have lived in Iran historically and even till the modern day live there. But the vast majority, 95%, is Ithna Ashari Shia, is predominantly 12er Shia. So in an environment where generally it's monolithic, is the debate on Allah? Although, by the way, I had many colleagues of mine who are Persians, who are atheists in grad school, who are engineering PhDs. They're Persians. I'm talking about those who are in the practicing religious community. By the way, we should not judge someone, whether they're atheist or agnostic or things of this nature. You don't know when Allah will bring someone back, especially in tonight's theme. And we don't know if we're ever going to stay on the right path. So we should have some humility in our belief. Have you ever heard that saying, holier than thou? This notion that I somehow am God's jurist, or I'm God's lawyer on earth. How can I be God's lawyer on earth? And how do I know what is in someone's heart? So we should be very patient and cognizant. Anyways, is the debate on Allah, for example, in the practicing community? Perhaps not. Is the debate on Rasulullah, for example? Perhaps not. Is the debate even on Imam Ali? Perhaps not, because everyone's already believing. So the debate starts on other issues, maybe Marthiya, this, that, or the other, down the road. Similarly, when we come to America, what is the issue of the day? Do I start the conversation with Allah? Do I start the conversation with Rasulullah? Do I start the conversation with Imam Ali? And this is the key that you and I need to unlock in the next few nights. And you will find that in a place like America, in a place like the United Kingdom, in a place like Canada, in a place like Australia, in a place like New Zealand, and many other places. In fact, I would argue perhaps the whole world today, because we are now a global village. You have to start from scratch. You have to first prove to me that God exists. Once you prove to me that God exists, then you can prove that I need religion. Prove to me I need religion today. Why do I need religion in 2022? I've got everything. And then the third level, you have to then prove to me that Islam is the religion of God. And there are several other questions. That's why when the older generation comes and says, it's in the Qur'an. Baba, did you first ask that person if the Qur'an is established as truth in that person's mind or not? If you have not established the Qur'an as a proof in that person's mind, how are you using it as a basis for your istidlal? How are you using it as a basis for your dalil? These are some of the reasons why we need to be very honest and transparent about what's going on in our communities and has been going on for a long time. I'm saying this with passion because unfortunately, if you say things a little lull, it doesn't have an impact. But I'm trying to be as humble as possible here because I don't know the answers. But I'm hoping that as a collective, we can come to some sort of answers. We can come to some realization that, look, we need to be very sober about answering those questions. Do you know today the Christian community, the practicing Christian community, when they come to try to give a philosophical, logical argument for the existence of God, do you know what they rely on? They rely on the Kalam cosmological argument from Islam. They say that's the most robust religious argument, not religious, philosophical argument that exists today, over 800 years old. In the Muslim world, it was established. We don't realize and benefit from our own rich tradition. It's a travesty. We should. And that's why it's so important for us to embark on this. Therefore, after this introduction, building on this, what are we going to discuss very succinctly tonight, inshallah? The first thing that I want to look at is what is freedom in the truest sense, and how does it relate to you and I in this level? Number two, what is the history of migration and freedom in its relationship and injustice? What has happened when justice was not established in a society? And what is this notion of migration when justice is not there? And what is its relationship to freedom? Number three, what are the verses that I've been reciting at the beginning? What are the verses of Surah Al-Kahf, the 18th chapter of the Qur'an? What are the verses that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam's blessed head was reciting on the spear, according to the narrations in the Bazaar of Kufa? And why is it pertinent to the notion of freedom? Number four, what is this moment in time in Karbala where Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he gives a statement for history that the whole world should know, that invites us all to reflect on it? What was that statement and why does it relate to freedom? And the final thing that we'll look at is who was that person who was able to exemplify freedom at the highest level on the day of Ashura? This is our agenda for tonight. Wherever you are, here in Seattle or across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, send us salawat on Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. At the first level, freedom is something that humankind and mankind has said is sacred. It's something that we strive to pursue. We try to get to an environment where we are freer, that everyone has this notion of freedom, that in America we even say that land of the free, home of the brave. We have these slogans that freedom, that our flag symbolizes freedom. And so you find that in our world and throughout times, there has been a value to freedom, that there's some importance related to freedom. But let us go on a journey in the Qur'an. Let us go on a journey in the scriptures of God. Let us go on a journey to understand what is the wisdom of God. When you go through the movements and you see the movements of the prophets, there is a constant theme of migration and movement. There's the movement of Adam from Jannah, whether that Jannah was on this earth or some other, that's a different argument, but a movement from there to the world. There's that movement. There's the movement or the migration of Nuh alayhi salam. As you know, the Ark of Nuh, the ship, the salvation, the Ark of Noah. So what happens is this flood emerges, and in that situation and in that environment, Nuh is there, and he has gotten his comrades and people and the animals who are on the ark, and then this flood begins to overtake the people. And at that point in time, there's a specific moment in time where Noah wants his son to come onto the boat, his own biological son. And at that point in time, God responds to Noah and says, إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ مِنْ أَهْلِ إِنَّهُ عَمَلٌ غَيْرُ صَالِحٍ. Allah says, he is not from you. He is not your son. As in, the dynamics of what is son in our definition and what God's definition may be different. إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ مِنْ أَهْلِ إِنَّهُ عَمَلٌ غَيْرُ صَالِحٍ. He is not from you and he has not done good acts. That's the reason as to why. This is something that we'll come to in a moment, in a few nights. Anyways, eventually what happens is this flood overtakes. So even though this migration happened, there was a movement. Now you may say, how far did they go? What happened? This is not the traditional sense. Remember, migration, we defined yesterday, migration can be physical, migration can be spiritual, migration can be intellectual. You and I have been going on intellectual migrations in these past few nights. We've been sitting here, but we've been going to the Far East. We've been going throughout the pages of time. That's a migration in and of itself. There's a spiritual migration that Lut or Ibrahim said, Inni muhajirun ila rabbi. I am migrating or immigrating towards my Lord. You all, many of you, migrated from different cities in America, from different countries across the globe, from different continents. That migration, there's a reason. Why did it happen? So this happens within this notion. Furthermore, there's a moment in time where the various prophets, they migrate. For example, you'll find Musa and his people, they migrate from one place to the other and they go to the promised land. Yaqub, for example, there's a migration of his family from one part to Egypt. These migrations happen. Rasulullah himself, there's a migration from Mecca to Medina. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, there's a migration from Medina to Mecca to ultimately Karbala. One principle that we find in the Qur'an and in the lives of the Ahlul Bayt is this, that your job as an individual, as a citizen of society, is to invite people to good and forbid them from evil. That is, Amar bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar, to promote good and to forbid evil, to invite people to do the right thing. But of course, before that, I must implement it in my own life. I must walk and embody and be that individual, that entity. And once I do that, then I invite others to good and then I invite others to refrain from bad. And when that doesn't happen, eventually a migration takes place. Nuh is propagating for Alfa Sanin illa khamsina ama. The Quran says 1,000 years less 50. Although he lived longer and he propagated longer, the Quran enshrines this. But they didn't listen. So Allah said, okay, here's the deal. So there's this notion that you and I have a responsibility in society to partake in society, invite people to good, forbid them from evil, and first and foremost implement it on ourselves. And if not, we may need to migrate, either physically or spiritually or intellectually in some form and some format. Now, this notion, this concept of freedom, what does it mean? And why is it so valuable? I just gave you the example of the prophets, which you can take from the Abrahamic faiths and the Ahlul Bayt. But let's come to our modern world. What's the history of Europe, for example? What's the history of what happened? When you find and you look at the history of Europe, for example, you will find an environment where Catholicism was dominant. The Catholic Church was dominant. And eventually a man comes forward and he comes from Germany and he lands in Rome, roughly 500 years ago. And when he comes from Germany, he lands in Rome and he's going to meet the Pope in Rome from Germany. He's saying, what on earth is going on here? He saw long lines and long queues. What were the long lines and long queues? For people to pay money to get their sins forgiven. He said, this is the religion of God? And he noticed the corruption that had ensued in the church. And he said, this is not the religion of God. So he takes his 95 reformations, he comes and he posts it on the church wall. This man's name was Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, the original Martin Luther of the Protestant Reformation. He comes forward and he ignites what's now called the Protestant Reformation. America was built by who? Catholics or Protestants built America. Why did they come to America? Because they were facing heavy persecution in Europe. And because of that heavy persecution, they said, we are not able to get justice here in this land. We must migrate in order to get justice. And once we get justice, we will ultimately have freedom. So we understand that the prerequisite to freedom is justice. And until and unless justice is established, true freedom does not come about. And sometimes that justice will never come about until you migrate, and then you will get your freedom. That's exactly what happened in the history of America. People had to flee. And once they fled, they did the migration, injustice, migration, and then the struggle, and then freedom. This is something that's very vital. This is something that's very important for us to consider. The first principle. Second principle, H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells is a British English writer who wrote many secular works. He wrote many works. In fact, many of his books have become movies in Hollywood. For example, War of the Worlds and the likes. This writer wrote much on fiction and he wrote many books, but he also wrote a history of the world, one longer and one shorter. In his History of the World, H.G. Wells, a short history of the world, the next book that I invite you to read, he comes forward and he says, look, if you look at Muhammad in the 6th century in Arabia, moving into the 7th century, what was it that gave dominance? By the way, there are places where H.G. Wells also criticized Rasulullah. Remember, I said, if I mention a name, doesn't mean I wholeheartedly accept every single thing the person says. Even if the person is Muslim, especially if the person is Muslim. The idea or the notion is that he comes forward and says, what was it that gave Islam that power? And how was it that Muhammad was able to take a group of people who were just a couple of years ago killing their infant daughters and committing infanticide and make them conquer the world? What was it? He said 3 elements stood out in the history of Islam. He's saying that 3 elements came forward. He says, number 1, the absolute monotheism in Islam. Absolute belief in one God. And that is one God. All the other religions had some other complexity. What he says, the freedom from theological complexity Islam brought. Freedom from theological complexity. Absolute monotheism. By the way, for my youth, which will come in a few nights, those who say Islam, science and religion are not compatible, read the writings of Newton on God. It's very interesting, besides his physics writing. Anyways, number 1, absolute monotheism in Islam, no complexity, freedom from complexity, he says, number 1. Number 2, there is no sacerdotalism. Big word, very simple, very fancy word for a very simple concept. There's no sacerdotalism. What does sacerdotalism mean? In Christianity, what H.G. Wells argues is there was this notion that the priest is the only one that can give sacrifice at the altar. The priest is my intermediary to God. That is, I need the priest in order to get to God. Islam didn't have this notion. That is, once you accept that you are all servants of God and you have absolute monotheism, everyone has access to God. So it gets rid of the middle managers. It gets rid of the middlemen. Second element. And he said the third element, perfect brotherhood and equality. Perfect brotherhood and equality. H.G. Wells is obviously not Muslim. And he said, regardless, perfect fraternity, perfect brotherhood and equality, regardless of caste, color, or creed. Side note, the Emir Stein Institute, not a Muslim institution, came forward and said, the first documented anti-racist in history is Rasulullah, is the Holy Prophet. Why? They said before the Prophet Muhammad, there were people who came forward and they said, I'm not going to be a racist. I'm not going to be a bigot. I'm not going to discriminate myself. But they did not tell others in society, and they did not demand from others in society to say to them that you must also not do this and perpetuate this. He's the first documented person who came forward and said this is wrong and other people should stop doing it. So these 3 elements, what do you think? Freedom from complexity, freedom. He said no middleman, perfect brotherhood and equality, regardless of caste, color, or creed. What is he saying in other words? In other words, he's saying Islam brought freedom, equality, and fraternity. Freedom, equality, and fraternity. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Where have you heard that before? Liberty, égalité, fraternité. Where did you hear that before? The French Revolution. The slogans of the French Revolution were liberty, freedom, liberty, equality, fraternity, brotherhood or sisterhood. That is, that if we want, in other words, H.G. Wells is saying that if you want to see the slogans of the French Revolution implemented before the French Revolution, you have to go to not the West in the 18th century, not France in the 18th century, you have to go to Arabia in the 6th century to see that implemented in society. Why is that important? Because our world doesn't run, the world that we've constructed today does not run without the French Revolution. You know, we use many slogans directly from the French Revolution we don't even know. I'll give you an example. Have you ever heard on the news or someone saying in politics, the right is saying or the left is saying? The right is saying, meaning usually the right is more conservatives and the left is more liberal leaning. That comes directly from the French Revolution. Why? After the French Revolution, they would have in their assembly chamber, or their parliament, as you would say, they would come forward and the speaker, the lead of the chamber would stand in the middle, and the loyalists to the king would be on the right, and the people who are loyalists to the republic would be on the left. This is where this slogan came from. Furthermore, on the way to my last trip, last Muharram, I was flying to LA, Los Angeles, and you know, you have a 5-hour flight, you get some time to watch some documentaries. So I'm watching a documentary about the American Revolution from the perspective of the British. The fascinating thing. That is, oftentimes throughout the pages of history, you have to look at who's writing history. I cannot take the history of India as told by the British, especially during colonial times, because they would sugarcoat everything. They're not going to tell you that, for example, they broke the hands of artisans. They're not going to tell you that there were famines and they could have done something to stop it. They're not going to tell you. Now writers have come forward in the last 2-3 decades and said, this is what happened. Similarly, when I look at the history of America, I cannot only look at the history written by Americans of the modern times. I have to look at the Native American perspective. I have to look at other perspectives, the African American perspective. What was their journey? Or what about the people's history, as Howard Zinn says? What was the narrative for the people on the ground? Similarly, they said, you know, there's many things that we fantasize about as Americans, for example, the Revolutionary War. Do you know that we could not have been independent? America could not have been independent without France. It would never happen. The support that France provided in terms of arms, in terms of ammunition, in terms of military, in terms of naval support, every single support that the French provided the United States allowed them to defeat the British. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. Furthermore, there are many other things. So that we like to say that it was a few revolutionaries who fought against the British. That's not exactly the whole picture. Furthermore, when you look at this, you find that the views of French writers at the time influenced heavily American founding fathers. For example, there's a very famous slogan in the history of America that you find is from Patrick Henry. When they were deciding, should we send military, the Virginian military, should we send them for this fight? And so this man, Patrick Henry, he gets up, and Jefferson and others are there, and he says, give me liberty or give me death. This famous statement that is often put forward. But where did he get that from? They say those are directly from the French writer Rousseau. Rousseau was saying what? Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau was saying in his very famous book, which I invite you all to read, called The Social Contract. In The Social Contract, Rousseau comes forward and he says, look, man is born free, and everywhere he is found in chains. What is he saying? Are you free? Am I free? Are we free? This requires some in-depth analysis. This requires us to go beyond the layers and look a little bit further. Allow me to explain. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the 18th chapter of the Qur'an, from the 9th verse onwards, he tells us, Am hasibta anna ashab al-kahfi wal-raqim kanu min ayatina ajaba. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is inviting those individuals who are not believers and who are on the wings to understand and reflect on the story of Ashab al-Kahf. First of all, how did this chapter come about? 3 individuals who were there in the early period of Islam. They were not Muslims and they were against Islam. Nadr bin Haris, Uqba bin Mu'ayt, and As ibn Wa'il, the father of Amr ibn As. In Karbala, you heard that name, his father. These individuals were always trying to find a way to belie Rasulullah. When Rasulullah was propagating in the beginning, they said, let's find some questions that we ask Muhammad, he doesn't have the answer to them. And then when he doesn't have the answer, we can prove that he's wrong. So they used to go to some of the scholars of the Abrahamic faiths in and around Mecca. So they would go, for example, one time they went and they said, give us some questions we can ask Muhammad. They said, look, your problem with him is your problem, but if you want questions, we can give you questions. That's not a problem. He says, okay, ask him, Yaqub, Jacob, was from Palestine. How did he end up in Egypt? When they asked this question, they went back to Rasulullah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the entire chapter of Surah Yusuf. Ahsan al-Qasas. The whole journey of where they moved from Palestine or Palestine to Egypt is documented in that story. Another time they come forward and they say, give us some questions we can ask Muhammad. Okay, they said very well. In the scriptures, there are these narrations, and maybe you can ask him these questions. What are the questions? Says, ask him, who are those sleepers of the cave, and what is their story? Number two, who did Moses go in search of? What was that story? What was that? Very well. Number three, who was the one who went east and west? So this ensued. They took these questions. Nadhr bin Haris, by the way, was a physician, one of the three people. Nadhr bin Haris, Uqba bin Mu'ayt, and As ibn Wa'il. As ibn Wa'il also, by the way, is in the tafsir and the shan and nuzul of Surah Kawthar. He's the one who called Rasulullah Abtar, although others used to. He was also the father of Amr ibn As, as I just mentioned a moment ago. But Nadhr ibn Haris was considered, he was a physician, he was the most educated person of the time. He had gone to Persia to learn their stories, and he said, Rasulullah is a plagiarizer, he's a fabricator. He's gone to Levant, he's gone to Syria, he's gone to Persia, he's gone here, he's gone there. He's collected these stories and he's compiled this book, and he was not believing. Nonetheless, by the way, there's a different paradigm. Abu Jahl, you may have heard of this name. Abu Jahl, who we call the father of ignorance, Rasulullah gave him this title. I don't know if you know what his name was before Islam. He was known as Abul Hakam, the father of judgment. He was considered the most intellectual person of the time. But Rasulullah said, no, this arrogance makes him Abu Jahl, the father of ignorance. Principle, though there are different standards for God's law and God's principles of what is necessarily knowledge. Nonetheless, coming back to this notion, they come back, they ask Rasulullah. Rasulullah says, I will wait for wahy. And 1 day passes and 2 days pass. Now, here's the thing. Many people say there's a delay in the revelation. But sometimes we don't understand the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see, as 1 day passed, 2 days passed, the people who are in opposition to Rasulullah are getting happier. And the Muslims are getting more nervous. Is the revelation coming or not? Does he have answers or not? But what was actually happening was Allah was allowing the gathering and the stadium to get filled, the assembly to occur. You know, you have these big fields, Lumen Field and T-Mobile Park and all this. He was letting people gather so that once they all gather and the whole city is on the brink and on the edge, he sent the entire Surah Kahf. And in it, he gave us the story of Ashab al-Kahf. He gave the story of the Musa and going to meet who we now call Khidr, but the name's not mentioned, that wise individual, and then further the story of Al-Qarnayn. But what was the wisdom? Why was Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam reciting these verses? The Bazaar of Kufa. That the companions say that I was in the Bazaar of Kufa on the terrace on the second level, and I saw the head of Imam al-Hussein on a lance reciting these verses. The principle of Ashab al-Kahf, the story of Ashab al-Kahf in Christianity is called the sleepers of the cave. The Christian community believes in Ashab al-Kahf the way that we do. It's a commonality amongst us and our Christian friends. The same way that the Immaculate Conception and the story of Maryam is a commonality amongst us and our Christian friends. So at that point in time, they called them the 7 sleepers of the cave of Ephesus. Ephesus in modern day Turkey, according to the history books. In our narrations, there are different theories. There's 7 different places where our scholars have said the cave could be. One is in Syria. One is, for example, one is Jordan. One is Turkey. And there's even one narration that's as far as modern day Scandinavia. How they got there, I don't know, but it's there. Nonetheless, at that point in time, what was their story? The depths, and I don't have the time to cover all of it, but these people who were Ashab al-Kahf, the Qur'an constantly gives us a theme. In this chapter in Surah Kahf, in Surah Yasin, for example, and various places. For example, in Surah Yasin, which is known as the heart of the Qur'an, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلَيْنِ يَسْعَى. That from the far part of the city, a man came. And people start discussing and debating, Ya Allah, what's that city? I want to know the name of the city. Is it Istanbul? Where is it? Croatia, Ukraine, Kiev? Where's that city? And the scholars and the Mufassirin say, if the name of the city was the main point, Allah would have told you. Allah, in fact, would have gave you the GPS address. He would have given you the coordinates. You could get there. But Allah is telling you and I that what matters more is the principle that I'm telling you. Similarly, in this case, Allah says that they debate. How many were there? Were there 5 or were there 7? And was the dog? They're debating about this because the Arabs before Islam even knew about this story, and they used to debate how many there were. Allah's saying, I'm telling you the principle. Focus on the principle. These were people, by the way, which we often think that they're young people, but that's not exactly what the Qur'an says. The Qur'an uses a term that says they were people. Youth, in our mind, may be something. In the Islamic domain, youth means under 40, for example. But youth can also mean a concept or a mindset. These were dignitaries of society who had a prominent position in government, according to ulama. And in that situation, they relinquished their and publicly stated their belief, and they migrated away from society. Again, justice, injustice, migration, freedom. So they migrated. They went into a cave, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected them. Now, juxtapose this with the story of Karbala. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is faced with the same situation, where he has invited, he's in a circumstance where injustice has become rampant. The halal of Muhammad has become haram, the haram of Muhammad has become halal. By the way, when we say the Sulah of Imam Hassan, the Sulah, always remember, the peace treaty of Imam Hassan is actually the Sulah of Hassanain, Imam Hassan and Hussein. Why? The proof and evidence of this is when Imam Hassan died, for 10 years Imam Hussein abided by the peace treaty of his brother. It wasn't until Muawiyah died and he gave the Khilafah to his son Yazid, who he was not supposed to do. That's when Imam Hussein rose. When Imam Hussein alayhi salam rose, he said, look, do you not see that Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi al Munkar is not upheld in society? Do you not see that the drift of Islam, you cannot call it Islam anymore? It's just Islam by name. It's just a thin layer of Islam on the outside by name. Inside, there's no Islam, it's empty. And no one is saying forbid evil, do good. No one's doing Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi al Munkar. He says, I have not gotten up and I have not risen for any fitna or fasad or anything. Why? Talab al-Islah. I have risen for seeking reformation in the nation of my grandfather Rasulullah. Now come with me here. One moment in time that I want you to never forget. There's a moment in time on the plains of Karbala where the narrations say Imam al-Hussein has gone to the battlefield and he has fought very courageously, and he is towards the final moments of his life. And when he's towards the final moments of his life, he's falling down towards the ground. And there's a moment where the enemy does not know if Imam Hussein is alive or dead. And they're wondering, is he dead or alive? And the narrations say, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad comes forward, or his lights, and says, I know how to tell if he's alive or dead. I know what to do. So what is it? To go and loot the tents of the women and children. So he gives the order, and they begin to proceed to loot the tents of the women and children. And the narration say, in that environment, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he supports himself on his elbows and he rises. And he gives a statement for history, in which he says, In lam yakun deen. That is, if you don't have deen, if you do not have religion, religion is not the proper translation of deen, but if you do not have Islam, if you do not have a deen, if you do not have a way of life, if you do not have deen, وَلَا تَخَافُونَ الْمَعَادِ وَلَا تَخَافُونَ الْآخِرَةِ. And if you are not fearful of the hereafter, then he says the line, فَكُونُوا أَحْرَارًا فِي دُنْيَاكُمْ. If you have no religion, no belief in the hereafter, at least be free in this world. Imam al-Hussein, question for you, with my hands together. The people that you are addressing and saying to them, if you don't have a religion, and if you don't believe in the hereafter, then at least be free. Look at this. These people that you are addressing, they are praying. They are hafiz of the Qur'an. They are saying, kill Hussein quickly so we can pray. They are saying all of the names, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasul. They're saying all the names of Islam. And you're saying, if you don't have religion and you don't believe in the hereafter, at least be free. Now let's come to freedom. The people you are addressing, they have the horses, they have the ammunition, they have the cavalry, they have the money, they have the power, they have everything by worldly standards. What you're saying they're not. What is freedom? What is freedom? That's the question. They had everything from the material realm. Imam is saying they're slaves, they're not free. How is it possible? Why is it that we call Imam al-Hussein, amongst one of the titles for you who go to Ziyarat and those who are from the Arab belt who know this, when you go, one of the titles of Imam al-Hussein is Abul Ahrar, the father of freedom, the father of the free man. Why? Wasn't he butchered on the plains of Karbala? He's the symbol of freedom, which we hold sacred in our world. How? That discussion that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam had with Umar ibn Sa'ad before the Battle of Karbala gives us some insight into what was going on. Remember, Umar ibn Sa'ad is the son of a very prominent companion of Rasulullah according to the Muslim world. The father of Umar ibn Sa'ad, his name is Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas. If you ask anyone in the Muslim world, in the broader Muslim world, they'll say Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas is one of the great companions of Rasulullah. In fact, they say when Rasulullah sent a delegation to China, the person who led the delegation to China was Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, and that's why the great mosque of Canton, one of the oldest mosques in history, was built. Now, historically, there's a debate on whether he was the one, but some delegation went, and eventually that happened. But Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas is a renowned companion. His son ends up becoming Umar ibn Sa'ad. Imam Hussein has a dialogue with him. Remember, the Ahlul Bayt did not migrate right away. They did not always just say, pick up, pack up, run. No. First, they did what's called itimam hujjah. They made sure that they gave the message and they did what their responsibility was, the same way that Nuh and Ibrahim and every other prophet did. And when people got the message, 13 times in Nahjul Balagha, you will find at least 13 letters that Imam Ali sends to Muawiyah. Does Imam Ali not know that Muawiyah is not going to listen to him? Of course he knows. He says, I have to do my responsibility. Similarly, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says, look, Umar ibn Sa'ad, why are you going to commit this atrocity? Why are you going to commit this massacre? Why are you going to do this? Do you not know whose son I am? Do you not know who's my grandfather? Do you not know my contribution, my family's contribution to Islam? Have we ever looked for anything for ourselves? Don't you remember? هَلْ أَتَى عَلَى الْإِنسَانِ حِينٌ مِنَ الدَّهْرِ لَمْ يَكُنْ شَيْئًا مَذْكُورًا Surah Al-Insan, Surah Al-Dahr. All Muslims agree the whole chapter was revealed for Ahlul Bayt, for Ali, Fatima, Hassan and Hussein. That وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَعَسِيرًا That they don't look for, they don't ask for anything, and they give away that which Allah has given, they give away to the poor, the orphan, and the wayfarer. Don't you know those verses were revealed for us? Don't you know the verses of Mubahila were revealed for us? Don't you know this? The Qur'an is littered with our mention. Why are you doing this? He says, look, there's a few things. He says, if I do this, you're right, everything you said right, but if I do this, I've been told I become the governor of right. Power, property, he said he got this, you would get the rulership of right. This concept is what led this environment where Imam said to him, you're not free. Freedom is emancipating yourself from your desires, emancipating yourself from your ego. Who are we commemorating tonight? A man by the name of Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyahi. What does Hur mean? Hur literally means free or freedom. That's why in Arabic, the word for freedom or liberty is hurriya, one of the words. Or for example, in Farsi and Urdu, you also use the term hurriyat or hurriyat. That comes from the same root word, freedom. There's a moment in time the narrations say that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and his family, they are moving from Mecca, they've left Mecca and they're going on their journey and they're continuing on this journey. And when they get to this particular land, the narrations say Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam's horse is not moving forward. When his horse is not moving forward, at that point in time, he switches horses once and twice and thrice. Some narrations say 6 or 7 times the Imam switches his horse and it's not moving forward. At that point in time, he says, may I ask the people, the dwellers of that land, can you tell me what is the name of this land? Where is this place? Where are we? Imam knows, but he's giving you and I a lesson from the pages of history. He says, what's the name, O people of this land? What's the name of this land? Someone came forward and says, we call this land Ghazariya. Someone said, what is there another name? Halaka ismun akhar. Is there another name for this land? So we also call Shaqul Furat, along the banks of the Furat. So is there another name? Halaka ismun akhar. Is there another name? They continue. So we've heard that this land is also called Nainawa. Halaka ismun akhar. They went on and on. He says, there's this name and that name. Until one elderly man stood up and he looked and he said, I have heard our elders call this land Karbala. Karbala. Imam said, Inna lillah. This is our destiny. We've reached it. At that point in time, the Imam dismounted and he began to set up his tents and his comrades' tents. The narrations say on the other side is a battalion that is being led by Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyahi. Hur is on the other side. Hur is on the opposite side. And there's a moment in time where he's being told that he has to intercept Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. But there's an interaction between Imam al-Hussein and Hur. And at that moment in time, Hur is trying to lead the Imam in one direction. And at that point in time, he puts his hand onto the reins of the horse of Imam al-Hussein. And when he does this at that point in time, Imam Hussein looks at him. He says, may your mother mourn you. As if he's saying, may you have died. How dare you do this? And Hur gives a line that indicates the goodness, some goodness in his heart. He says, had your mother been anyone else, I would have responded to you in the same way. And I can't. She's Fatima Zahra. At that point in time, Imam al-Hussein at this time has the control of the water. And look at the control, look at freedom. Freedom is to be able to be emancipated and free from the control of my ego and my anger and my desires. Imam al-Hussein knew that tomorrow what's going to happen. He said, Abbas, make sure that every single person in Hur's battalion drinks water. And make sure that even the animals drink water. And do not remove the water until they move their necks away from the water. Everyone drank water to the fill. A few days later, the order came from the side of Yazid to cut off the water from the women and children in the camp of Imam al-Hussein. And they did not reciprocate that humanity. Nonetheless, every day the army is growing on the side of Yazid. Imam al-Hussein has his camp. At that point in time, the narrations say, Hur is in a situation where he thinks that this is just an intimidation tactic. There will be no war. We're just going to show our numbers and eventually we will come to a victory. There will be no bloodshed. Then as the days come, he's in the tent the night before. And at that point in time, Umar Asad gives the order that tonight we're going to fight. We're going to start the battle. And then Imam al-Hussein sends Abbas. He says, Abbas, go and tell them one night. That one night, Imam was not asking for it. He was giving it. Because there was someone yet to come. And that someone was pacing back and forth in his tent. And he went to Umar ibn Sa'ad and he said, look, you're not really going to fight tomorrow, right? He's looking at the commanders, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, Umar ibn Sa'ad. You're really not going to fight tomorrow, right? We're just going to intimidate and then we're going to go. We're going to win, right? There's no bloodshed. You're surely not going to kill the son of Fatima. He said, tomorrow let day break, you will see, we will butcher all of them. When he understood this, he began to pace back and forth. When he left the tent, he was pacing back and forth. Some people looked at Hur, they said, Hur, if we were asked who is the bravest person in this army, we would give your name. You look like you're in a state of anxiety and worry. He says, how do you find yourself? He says, Bain al-Jannati wal-Nar. I find myself between heaven and hell. Remember, Hur means freedom. Dr. Ali Shariati in his commentary on Hur, he says an amazing analysis. He says, we are all Hur, whether we realize it or not. Every single one of us is Hur at every moment in time. You see, we can continue to reflect and think at every moment in time. Should I go? Should I stay? But when we know what is true, do we take that step and go forward? The poet says, and I'll translate, Hama shab intezar subh visal, shab nahi zindagi guzari hai, aur faisle ka hai ek pal varna, sochne ko to umr sari hai. He says with respect to Hur, he says there's one moment of decision that Hur made that decision, I'm going to go. And he didn't look back. Otherwise, you can spend your whole life thinking. There may have been other people in the camp of Yazid who were thinking, should I stay or should I go? But they got eternal damnation. Why? Because they didn't make the active step that Hur did. Hur went. And when Hur went at that point in time, and I'm drawing to a conclusion, Ali Shariati says, we're all Hur. We all have the choice to choose between right and wrong at every moment in time. And what's beautiful about it is, if my ship is sailing in the wrong direction, I can turn it the way Hur did. And at that point in time, what happens? He goes, and some say he goes with the son and a servant, and he says, tie my hands and cover my face, because I don't know if you'll accept me on the other side. And he goes, as they're getting closer, on the other side, Imam al-Hussein is there, and he has Abu al-Fadl Abbas, and he has Ali al-Akbar. He says, Abbas, Akbar, my guest is coming, go and greet him. They go at that point in time. And as their Hur and his son and slave are getting closer at that point in time, so what's going on? Because he had covered his face, they had covered his face, he says, you're getting closer. You are right near the son of Fatima Zahra. He says, throw me onto the ground. And when he's thrown onto the ground, it is as if he extends his hands that are tied towards the feet of Imam al-Hussein. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And he says, can I be forgiven? Oh my master, oh my Mawla. Freedom, what is freedom? He says, can I be forgiven? Look at the mind and the heart of Hussein. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam picks up Hur, hugs him. And he says, Hur, I have forgiven you and my Lord has forgiven you. The freedom from ego, the freedom from anger, the freedom from vanity, the freedom from all the negative attributes in that moment that a person is dealt with. Imam al-Hussein said, I am in control of my nafs in totality. That's freedom. That point in time, he says, you are welcome, you are a guest. But then he says a line, and only the line which the son of Fatima al-Zahra can say, he says, Hur, I thank you and I welcome you for coming, but I also apologize. He says, Yabna Rasulullah, why do you apologize? He says, I apologize because yesterday when you came to us and you are an enemy, we had water to give you. Today, when you come as a guest, I have no water to give you. These children, they have not had water for several days. There has been no water. I have nothing to give you. At that point in time, the narrations say that Hur, he requests that perhaps he can be one of the first to go towards the battlefield. And at that point in time, the narrations say, in some narrations, he says, I want my son to go first before me so that I see that he goes on this path while I am alive. At that point in time, the son of Hur goes. When the son of Hur goes, he fights courageously, but then he is brought down to the ground, and at that point in time he calls on to his father. When he calls on to his father, Hur runs. When Hur runs, what does he notice? What does he see? He sees that the head of the son of Hur is in the lap of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Imam al-Hussein says, Hur, get away from here. It is a young son. This is not a place for a father to be. Get away from here. I will take care of this. Ajrukum ala Allah. I would ask Imam al-Hussein, a few moments will be Aliyun al-Akbar, and it will be you who has his head in his lap, who will be there to help at that moment. Nonetheless, the narrations say, then Hur went, and Hur fought very courageously. They called him a traitor. They said, you are treasonous, and they fought him, and they killed him, and they butchered him. At that moment, when he fell, Imam al-Hussein ran towards Hur, and when he ran towards Hur, he took Hur, and he took his head in his lap. And there are narrations at that point in time, Imam al-Hussein is talking to Hur, and he says, Hur, your mother named you well. Hur, your mother gave you a beautiful name. Your name is Hur, freedom, and the free one. Anta hurrun fid dunya wal akhirah. You are free in this world, and you are free in the hereafter. And the narrations say he took the handkerchief and he took the scarf that belonged to Fatima al-Zahra, and he tied it onto the forehead of Hur to stop the bleeding that would occur at that moment in time when this ensued. This was the one who was lucky. That was Hur. He was fortunate. He changed his destiny. But I asked the question, oh Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, a few moments later, it will be you all alone on the plains of Karbala. You will fall from the horse. There will be no one to catch your head in their lap. Who will be there to assist you at that moment in time when you fall from the horse? Sallallahu alayka ya Rasul. Sallallahu alayka ya Amir. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima al-Zahra, Sayyid al-Nisa al-Alim. Sallallahu alayka ya Hasan al-Mujtaba. Assalamu ala al-Husayn. Wa ala Ali ibn al-Husayn. Wa ala awlad wa ala ashab al-Husayn.
Hussein, Ya 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 Hussein. Brothers and sisters, again, I will Tamam alam mein aaj matam Hussein bekas kah raha hai. Tamam alam mein aaj matam Hussein bekas kah raha hai. Everyone please. Tamam alam mein aaj matam Hussein bekas kah raha hai. Tamam alam mein aaj matam Hussein bekas kah raha hai. अलंगरों में सचे हुए में दिलों में फर्शे अज़ा बिछा है. तमाम आलम में आज मातम तमाम आलम में आज मातम दिया कपड़े سیاہ چادر غموں کی گرد ہو غبار سر پر سوگواروں کے اشک جاری کہ ثانی زہرا بیدار ہے تمام عالم تمام عالم میں آج ماتم حسین بے کس کا ہو رہا ہے نہ چشم پرنم ہو کیوں سواری جلوس ہے گل جنا خالی کہ میرے دلدل سوار مولا زمین کربل میں سو رہا ہے تمام عالم تمام عالم میں آج ماتم علم میں مشکے سکینہ دیکھو تم مومنوں بس یہ کہتے رو لو چچا بھتیجی میں کیا ہے نسبت وفائے عباس کیا وفا ہے تمام عالم ہم عالم میں آج ماتم حسین پیری میں دل سوالے کہ جس سے الجھی سینہ نکھالے جوان بیٹا لہو میں ڈوبا سنگی پہ ایری لگن رہا ہے تمام عالم تمام عالم میں آج ماتم نمر برسی دل نبی پر ابھی ہوئے ہیں جوان اکبر یہ قتل جس کو تو کر رہا ہے یہ تو ہم شکل مصطفیٰ ہے تمام عالم کر رہا ہے تمام عالم میں آج ماتم حسین بے کس کا ہو رہا ہے ازائشہ دیر ہے عبادت جناب زینب کی ہے امانت نوحہ تیرے کرم سے محشر جناب زہرا کی ایک قطار ہے تمام عالم حسین بے کس کا ہو رہا ہے مدینے والوں خاموش رہنا غریب زینب سے کچھ نہ کہنا بسا ہوا گھر جو لے گئی تھی وہ کربلا میں اتر گیا ہے تمام عالم بے کس کا ہو رہا ہے تمام عالم میں آج ماتم حسین بے کس کا ہو رہا ہے
یا حسین ہو یا حسین ہو گناہ کارت منم تا قیامت عبد در بارت منم یا حسین حر گناه کارت منم تا قیامت عبد در بارت منم خاک عباس علم دار منم خاک عباس علم خیلی قدیمی ها گریه کردن خاک عباس
بندش مال من و تو چی بگی؟ توبه کردم یا حسین یا الهی بالحسین یا الهی بالحسین یا الهی بالحسین توبه کردم یا حسین یا الهی بالحسین یا الهی یا الهی من سر راه تو بستم یا حسین قلب زینب را شکستم یا حسین از رخت شرمنده هستم یا حسین از رخت شرمنده هست چی میگه هول یا به جد خویش پیغمبر ببخش یا به قد و قامت اکبر ببخش یا به کام تشنه اصغر ببخش توبه کردم یا حسین توبه کردم یا حسین توبه کردم یا حسین توبه کردم خوشبالانه که امشب خریده میشن یا الهی بالحسین یا الهی بالحسین یا الهی بالحسین یا الهی جانم همه یا الهی بالحسین یم احسان احسان القدیم من فقیرم تو کریم ابن الکریم یا حسین استغفر الله العظیم یا حسین استغفر الله العظیم ای به دامان تو دستم یا حسین بر سر راحت نشستم یا حسین من دگر حر تو هستم یا حسین توبه کردم یا حسین یا الهی بالحسین یا الهی بالحسین یا الهی بالحسین یا الهی جانم همه یا الهی بالحسین
وويلي على المظلوم وويلي على المظلوم زينب صاحت بعبره جدة من قطع نحره طبروا ب12 صبره والخيل سحقت صدره زينب صاحت بعبره جدة من قطع نحره طبروا ب12 صبره والخيل سحقت صدره مثل ما الضلع مهشوم مثل ما الضلع مهشوم ما انساه نالامه ورضى وعظامه بعد حرقه وخيانه يلحقوا ويتامه روحي على اليتامى تحوم روحي على اليتامى تحوم وين انطي الوجه بعده وين انطي الوجه بعده حسين على الرمل خده سهم مثلث بكبده صاحت فاطمة عنده سهم مثلث بكبده سهم مثلث بكبده صاحت فاطمة عنده تلطم والضلع مهشوم تلطم والضلع مهشوم نروح للعباس ها واويلي على العباس واويلي على العباس الغالي جفوفه قطعوها عينه بسهم طفوها من نظم خادم الحسين المخلص كرار حسين الكربلائي واويلي على العباس ادوى العمر واويلي على العباس الغالي جفوفه قطعوها عينه بسهم طفوها الهامة بعمد هشموها اخته تصيح خلوها ظلت تلطم على الراس ظلت تلطم على الراس تبكي وصاحت سكينة تبكي وصاحت سكينة شنو شيال العالم شيال العالم وانا خل يلحق علينا ننحب ما ديره بينا واويل تتفرج علينا النار تتفرج علينا النار صاحت زينب بحيرة صاحت زينب بحيرة ما تقعد يا ابو الغيرة صاحت زينب بحيرة ما تقعد يا ابو الغيرة اختك ضاعت يسيرة من ديرة لعد ديرة وبضعنك حدة ارجال وبضعنك حدة ارجال صاحت زينب بحيرة صاحت زينب بحيرة ما تقعد يا ابو صاحت زينب بحيرة ما تقعد يا ابو الغيرة اختك راحت يسيرة من ديرة لعد ديرة يلا وبضعنك حدة ارجال
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله الله أكبر ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا حجة الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل على خير قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله الصلاة والسلام الله أكبر الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد ونستعين إلى الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب من شر النفاثات في العقد من شر حاسد إذا حسد الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله الله أكبر حول الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم إياك نعبد ونستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ربنا آتنا في حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله أنا ربي سمع الله لمن الله أكبر الله سبحانه سبحانه على الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب الله أكبر سبحانه 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 الله الحمد أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله اللهم صل على محمد الله الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي صل على سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى الله أكبر استغفر الله ربي الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى يا ولي العافية والعافية يا الله أكبر بسم الله وبالله الحمد لله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده محمد عبده اللهم صل على محمد السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله السلام علينا عباد الله الصالحين السلام عليكم السلام عليكم وملائكته يصلون على النبي والذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما
اللهم صل على محمد اللهم صل على محمد اللهم صل على محمد
تسليما سلام الله عليه اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم استغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم الرحمن الرحيم لا والإكرام وأتوب إليه استغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم الرحمن الرحيم ذو الجلال والإكرام استغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم الرحمن الرحيم ذو الجلال والإكرام
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم إني أسألك موجبات رحمتك دائما مغفرة والنجاة من النار ومن كل بلية والفوز بالجنة والرضوان في دار السلام وجوار نبيك محمد عليه وآله السلام اللهم ما بنا من نعمة لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Just a very quick attention. Okay. Brothers and sisters, request that our program starts at 7:30, right? So it's hard for us to start and there's nobody here. Okay? Because the time is very short, we don't want to delay Maghrib. And Maghrib time is 9 o'clock. So if you start late, we cannot really finish in time. And I think Salaat is priority. So please try to make it 7:30 so we can start properly. The other thing is really my request to all of you is that in this month of Muharram, let us try to make a resolution to at least come to the mosque for prayer. If not every day, it's once a week maybe, right? Weekend, Saturday or Sunday, right? You still go the next weekend. And this is the month of Muharram. Come and see what it's like to pray in either Maghrib or Dhuhr. Please try to make an effort, inshallah. Okay? Next Sunday or next Saturday, I hope to see you. It's a beautiful weather, by the way. You can go for a walk then, maybe go for a swim after that. You know, there's always a lot of incentives here. If you make it a habit, inshallah, you get it in a habit. Thank you. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا حجة الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير الأعمال حي على خير الأعمال في الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الله أكبر استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان سبحان الله أكبر بكبر الله وقوله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد يولد ولم يكن اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من صل على محمد سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي سمع الله لمن حمده
الله سبحانه وتعالى.
الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر.
الله سبحانه وتعالى.
الله أكبر. الحمد لله. لا إله إلا الله وحده. أشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد. الله أكبر.
سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان
سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر.
الله سبحان الله سبحان الله ربي الله.
الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي.
الله سبحان الله سبحان الله.
الله أكبر. قول الله وقول. الله أكبر.
سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله.
سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر.
سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الله.
الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر.
سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان. يا ولي العافية نسألك.
الله أكبر. بسم الله ولله الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. محمد عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على. السلام عليك أيها. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
اللهم صل على محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. اللهم صل على محمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. استغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم الرحمن الرحيم. الجلال والإكرام. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي الرحمن الرحيم. الجلال والإكرام. استغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي الرحمن الرحيم. الجلال والإكرام.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إنه ليس لي علم بموضع اسمي، وإنما أطلبه بخطرات تخطى قلبي، فأجود في طلبه الحمدان. كان فيما أنا طالب كالحيران،
لا أدري أفي سهل هو أم في جبل أم في أرض أم في سماء أم في بر أم في بحر وعلى يدي من ومن قبل من قد علمت أن علمه عندك وأسبابه بيدك أنت الذي تقسمه وتسببه برحمتك اللهم فصل على محمد وآله واجعل يا ربي رزقك لي واسعا ومطلبه سهلا ومأخذه قريبا ولا تعنني بطلب ما لم تقدر لي فيه رزقا فإنك غني عن أنا فقير إلى رحمتك صل على محمد وآله وجد على عبدك بفضلك إنك ذو فضل عظيم.
This is brothers, as we complete our prayers tonight, let us remember those people who are in difficult situations, those who are in hospitals, at home recovering. Special prayer for Brother Ahmed Jafri's father, who is all those people who are languishing unjustly in prisons, those who are stuck in conflict zones, those who are in refugee camps, displaced, or enduring economic hardship. May Allah bring them relief. Let us all together pray. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء.
The request for Surah Al-Fatiha for the Isai Sabab of the Marthiya of Ahmed Jafri and Fatima Hussain families, sponsors the Qur'an tonight. All those who have supported financially for the families, and for the Mahumins of all the departed souls of our family and friends. Which is Ziyarat.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدتي نساء العالمين السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل ولا جعله الله آخر اللحد من صيام السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك وعلى 9 المعصومين من ذرية الحسين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد الحسن بن علي. السلام عليك يا مولانا يا صاحب العصر والأمان السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان السلام عليك يا إمامي وإمامي عجل الله تعالى وفرج وسهل الله مخرجك ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم كن لوليك الحجة الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا قائدا وناصرا ودليلا وأينا حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا يا أرحم
Thank you all for coming, brothers and sisters. This is the close our program. Please refrain from hugging and checking for your protection. Enjoy heaven and barak. See you tomorrow at 7:30, inshallah.
The moon of Muharram, times of sadness have come. The crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. The moon of Muharram, times of sadness have come. The crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. Betrayal by the Kufans set this moon on its course, calling out for their guide. Treachery with no remorse, Muslim and his sons. What a tragedy, oh what calamity. The moon bleeds to foresee, the moon bleeds to foresee. The moon of Muharram, times of sadness have come. The crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. On the 9th it heard the prayers of those pure souls, fought the rising sun for. Perhaps this could be its role. Akbar's azan so clear, this moon filled with fear. How will it possibly arise and see the state of those dear, and see the state of those dear? The moon of Muharram, times of sadness have come. The crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. It saw the 6-month infant, no water but an arrow. That night it shone its light on, Rabab filled with such sorrow. To see my asghar I crave, I hear nothing but his cries. Oh son, please do not arise, and with this mother sympathize, and with this mother sympathize. The moon of Muharram, times of sadness have come. The crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. Witnessed it the trampling on Sham-e Ghariba, saw that night the terror, bodies scattered afar, tents looted and on fire, earrings snatched from Ruqayyah. This moon also in such pains, this household bound in chains, this household bound in chains. The moon of Muharram, times of sadness have come, the crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. From this month my baby had to wander veilless. Zahra's grave is restless, for her daughter princess the cloak of purity. For this mother so holy, the beloved of Fatima, paraded in the bazaar, paraded in the bazaar. The moon of Muharram, times of sadness have come, the crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala.